Oh, Foxy, it's your birthday. Not for real, just for play. This is Cree Summer, and Moana Nui will be right back.
Aloha, everyone, and thank you for joining the Moana Nui podcast. We're so excited for you to be a part of tonight's show for our monthly segment on our Indigenous legal insights. But before we get started, of course, the month of May is Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Heritage Month, or AANHPI Heritage Month. And in honor of this month, the Moana Nui podcast will highlight Native Hawaiians that are making a difference in the community. Tonight, we are proudly to recognize the first Kanaka Maoli, or Native Hawaiian cultural interpreter, on the staff of the National Museum of American Indian. Her name is Gabrielle Lee. She is from the island of Oahu, and she started at the museum in January of 2020. So this is, of course, big news of seeing how we're changing the scope and the landscape of Native Hawaiians making an impact in different places and organizations. So definitely look up Gabrielle Lee. She also go by Gabby, and you'll learn her story. If you, especially on the Smithsonian's website, you'll see a little article on her right there. So we're very excited to kind of have those little highlights. Hello, thank you for joining tonight. And of course, Moana is unable to join us this evening, but we're definitely, of course, she is doing her moving and shaking. For those that are tuning in for the first time, Moana, the other half of my show, she is a children's book author, but most recently, she is also a writer and cultural consultant on Disney's Lilo and Stitch comic book series. 3 issues have been released so far, and they have a compilation anthology that is for pre-order on Amazon that you can also get, that she's a part of. But we're so excited that she's a part of that. Most of us grew up with that movie, and now she is continuing that story of Lilo and Stitch for us today. And now I'm going to go ahead and welcome our guest for this evening, our sister and and our Ohana, but most of all, she is best known as Kumu Michelle Manu. She is a powerhouse. If you do not know who this woman is, definitely look her up, learn more about her, especially if you're looking for great women speakers at your company or your organization. But for those that are tuning in for the first time, let you get to know who she is. She's internationally known for her accomplishments as a 10th degree black belt. She is a Kumu Luau of Indigenous Hawaiian culture practice and martial. But she is currently the only high-ranking female teacher of this art, and currently the only public representative of a Hawaiian woman warrior in over 200 years. She's the only woman to be given the recognition of Knight Commander for her continued work in protecting, promoting the Hawaiian culture through luau. But not only that, she has been a legal professional for 26 years. Of course, she started this at the age of 4. But with that, she's doing so many amazing things between doing legal, but also using lua and hula. She's teaching people self-defense. to people in high risk environments like pilots, flight attendants, real estate professionals, healthcare professionals, and so many more. And then, but she's also works as a fight coordinator for Hollywood and for different films. And she just added director into her resume too. So let me go ahead and welcome this Renaissance woman. This, the hats are piling up that she needs a hat store now because of all the accolades and all the stuff she's doing. So let me welcome our sis, Kumu Michelle Manu, to the show. Welcome.
Oh, Dana, too much. You crack me up. I love you, sis. It's always wonderful to be here. This is just another show. I think it's in the same realm as protection, not
Yes.
physical protection, but protection of what we're building in our life, right? And that can we take care of it, nurture it, and also leave it to those that we should leave it to. And it's not taken by a governmental entity or someone that chooses that they should have your rightful life's work. So we
Yes.
spoke a little bit about well, we had a show previously on legal contracts. So we went over a little bit of this business entities and structures. But tonight we'll get into it, and it's a lot of information. And
Yes.
I sent a helpful chart earlier that maybe we could post at maybe towards the end of
Okay.
the podcast. And so we're going to be talking about business types today. And
Mm-hmm.
there were some very specific, very great, deep questions on artists, really, and what is the
Yeah.
best business type for artists. So we'll definitely get into that. But I wanted to start, and then maybe you can start asking your questions.
Yes, it definitely, because as you know, most of our audience are people that own their own small
Creatives.
business or independent creators or artists or writers. What are the most common types of business structures available for small businesses and independent creators?
Well, I think the hands down vote today in what is offered is an LLC, and that's a limited liability company, is the most popular that we see today. Also, sometimes sole proprietorships, we'll get into that, partnerships and nonprofit organizations are also options for creatives. But right now, the LLC is definitely the number one choice that we're seeing across the US. So, a business type, business structure, business entity, these are all synonymous, and it's the
Mhm.
legal blueprint by which you want to create and run, maintain, and dissolve any business. And so the chosen business structure determines company ownership, profit distribution, decision-making power, and regulatory requirements, and of course, taxation. But beyond these high-level operational things that are daily, once you put them into effect, the structure of a business affects many aspects of the day-to-day operations, such as administrative overhead, record keeping, and tax planning. Banks and investors, too, based on your type of business, may take a look at what type of business structure you are formed as, whether when they are deciding to whether give you a loan or other financing, and sometimes investments too. And if a company runs into legal or financial trouble, the business structure determines who's responsible. So this isn't just like, I think I'll just start a business and you just start a business. There's some real planning that goes into it if you want to do it right and not get screwed in the end, because we always think of from the honeymoon marriage stage, right? The wedding, we don't necessarily think of it from the divorce aspect. And being a protector and a good guardian of what we're given, it's really important for us to think of that divorce, the end, the finality, and the dissolution of something. So the type of business structure that we choose impacts the organizational structure of the company at every level, from the person getting the mail and assisting and answering phones to the person, that's the face of the company on different levels. There's so many verticals today. There's a face for HR and people. There's a face for operations. There's a face for procurement. There's a face for, as a CEO. So each, company is different on who's the face for what vertical and the overall company as a whole. And so it's crucial that we think carefully about the decision and speak with our financial advisors, our attorneys, and accountants to weigh in on what they feel is best for your company. What are your plans? Do you plan to keep it until it dies or you die? Or do you plan to build it up, build it into something and sell it when it gets to a certain level? So these are all very important questions that help you form your corporation or company. They're two different things, and we'll get into that too. It helps with networking too. So yeah, anyway, so I'm open for all your questions tonight. We just asked one.
Yes. And of course, those that are watching this episode, if you have any questions, definitely make sure you put them in the comment section of the platform you're watching us, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, X, or YouTube. Yes, I think I covered all of them. Or
You're
Instagram.
on so many platforms. It's amazing. Oh.
But my next question, as I mentioned, we have comic book creators in our audience. How do you determine which business structure is best suited for a comic book creation business?
Well, like I said, the most popular is an LLC right now, especially for comic book creators. And you'll see that if you're to do a quick Google search looking for an attorney to assist, there are actually attorneys that are specialized in comic creators, and businesses that they're trying to start. So these might be those attorneys that you really want to seek out. But it's because the setup and the maintenance is less complicated than a traditional corporation, and not just the C corporation, but the S corporation. And it limits legal and financial exposure, allows for deductible expenses, and one person can run the entire LLC as a managing member. So you don't have to have a board. They don't have to vote. You're in full control. There's unlimited legal exposure. The first benefit of an LLC can be found in the name of the company. So you want to make sure that you're choosing a name that is good for you. Do the research, make sure it's available, and that no one comes back and says that you stole their name or it's too similar, that it causes confusion in the consumer space. But if you run into legal or financial trouble without any corporate form, so you're a sole proprietor, then whoever is trying to get money from you can go after your home, your car, your bank account, and any other assets that you own to collect this perceived debt from you. But if you create an LLC and you do all of your business through that company and doing it correctly, as there's a thing called piercing the corporate veil, then your liability is limited to the amount of money or assets owned by the LLC, which means is in the name of the LLC. So it's equivalent to like what we talked about as far as estate planning several months ago. You can have, a trust, but if that car is not in the trust's name, if the house isn't in the trust's name, if the income property isn't in the trust's name, then the trust really doesn't have any dominion over it. So that's still open for dispute and probate court. This is kind of the same thing. From a legal standpoint, the LLC is a separate person. I always say that it gets its own social security number, and that's the EIN from the feds. And so you treat it as if it's a loved one that you care for. That can't care for itself. You're its custodian of record, and making sure that everything is taken care of properly so that you're not breaching any of the regulatory requirements and financial requirements, right? So I was going to say there's examples, many examples I know of oversimplified the liability aspect here. This is very, very high level, but an LLC is definitely a way to shield you personally from any type of claims or lawsuits that might come your way as a creator. It's such a volatile space, right? So yeah, important. An LLC would be the best way to go for anyone that's a creator right now.
Very good. That's very good advice to kind of give our creators that are out there, especially those that are trying to separate personal from business with their life. Now, of course, getting ready to set up a business structure, what what would someone look at as the initial cost to associate with setting up each type of business structure that is currently out there?
Well, it depends on what state you incorporate in. They all have different tax requirements annually. Of course, California being the highest, and I'll get into that. I'm probably going to focus more on LLC tonight because this is the most beneficial for creators. But if you want to do it on your own, then of course that's free of cost. But if you choose to hire an attorney, it can be anywhere from $1,500 to and upward. I mean, I see 2,500 a lot, and this includes quite a bit: filing your initial paperwork, as well as maybe even getting some domains if you need them. Maybe auctioning on some domains if they're already taken, doing the due diligence behind the scenes to see if there's any conflicts with the name, also getting your SS4, which is your EIN with federal, and also registering that. So all this happens through the state. Now there's several states that are very beneficial for businesses, small businesses in particular, and that's because of their state taxation rate. So you think of all the states that have minimal or no state tax. These are the ones that companies generally go to. I can say that the recent stat today is that 67% of all Fortune 500s will form and have formed in the state of Delaware, because of their beneficial business taxation, that are registered there. So other states that have lower taxes for businesses, and these are just a few: Wyoming, Nevada, Florida, Utah, Texas, and Indiana. There are more than that. In North Carolina, Wisconsin, there are several others. So definitely look at what state you want to form in, but also know that if you're going to form, say, in Delaware, and your principal place of business is not there, you'll have an additional cost of having an agent there, a registered agent. And that's anywhere from 100 on up every year. And they would be the ones to receive any legal correspondence on your behalf. That has to happen if you're not in the primary state in which you've incorporated. So say you get sued, someone slips and falls at your place, even if it's in Georgia, they would have to write to that, or deliver or serve any legal correspondence to that registered agent for process. So that's an incurred cost there. So to form an LLC in Hawaii is $50 right now. They have no minimum taxes annually. It's based off what you do and what the write-offs are. So profit versus loss. $70 in California, but they have an annual franchise tax state tax minimum $800 whether you're in business or not, and that's for as long as you're incorporated. I think I actually owe mine. And in DC, the LLC filing cost is $99. If you're operating at home, there is a one-time home permit fee of $72.60. And in Georgia, like you are at Dana, so if you wanted to open an LLC, the state filing fee is $100 with no other extra charges. So there are annual taxes that you'll have to file. You have to file your personal and you have to file your LLC. You cannot combine them. As I said, there's two separate people. And the average for business taxes is somewhere in California around $250. That's an additional cost to you for running your business, but it's also an expense. And also you would owe obviously on what you owe federally. So these are some things that will be coming out of pocket for you, especially if you didn't make a lot and you don't have a lot of expenses you're going to owe. And that's about it as far as forming the initial
Okay,
cost and what you can expect annually.
gotcha. Okay. So of course you kind of went into the cost aspect, but how does each business structure, let's as like you mentioned the LLC, how does the business structure LLC impact my personal liability? Like, what are the pros and cons of it?
Well, I'm not entirely qualified to speak on this because I'm not a CPA or an accountant. That should always be discussed. It's before and during, of course, after winding up a corporation. But LLCs are taxed like a partnership. So, like, I'll explain a little bit further into our discussion about corporations and different taxations there and how they're taxed. But an LLC will provide that shield for you, and what would be available to someone that is suing you, or demanding anything would be what is held in the LLC. So I I would put everything in the LLC, especially if you're a sole proprietor that's now shifting to an LLC, which means your car still get mileage or depreciation, whichever you choose, depending on what type of car you have, right? How much you drive, how many um, types of repairs you have in 1 year. And the rent, if you have a storefront or if you have a workplace or a studio, or if not, you can actually deduct. The LLC will pay for part of your home or your apartment in which you have designated just for your workspace. Um, so anyway, those are the tax things, but it really shields you from outside aggressors, but making sure that what really should be in the LLC's name is really in the LLC's name and claimed on your tax return. And this also helps too with insurance. There's business insurance, and there's insurance that will help you protect your IP. If someone comes back
Okay.
and says you're infringing on my IP, if someone steals your IP, that your insurance policy may in fact help you pay for some of those prosecution fees in the federal court. So, all of these things are very important, making sure they're where they need to be protected.
Exactly. Okay. So, of course, most people's concern when looking at business structures, um, our favorite thing, taxes. What are the tax implications for like an LLC that you can, pros and cons that you can expect?
Well, I think the pros are definitely that it's a pass-through entity, so it's not taxed at the corporation level. Just like
Mhm.
partnerships, and nonprofits obviously don't pay any taxes, but LLPs, the limited liability partnerships, these also are flow-throughs. But the S corporation is taxed like the rest. The only one that really stands out that I'm aware of is the C corporation, which is our oldest form of business entity in the US. And this is taxed twice, once at the corporate level and then once at the personal level. So there is a benefit, though, to being a C Corp if you plan to build a very large corporation and where their stockholders, their shareholders, the stock is the same. So everyone has the same voting rights. And also, you're planning to go public. So this is when you would see the C level really be the most opportune type of business entity to use. Now, the S Corp, however, is different because, again, like I said, it's taxed like a partnership in an LLC. And they can hold different types of stock and they can offer different types of dividends where it's
Mm,
not so regulated like the C Corp. So there are a lot of documents need to be filed for the C Corp annually, especially if you are paying out dividends and people are cashing out and more people are buying in. And there's a dilution of investors as well, shareholders. At what point do you stop so that everyone else's stock is left to
mhm,
mean nothing? So that's beyond my pay grade right now. But these are all things to consider. It depends on what type of empire you want to build. Do you want to are you
mhm,
happy with using part of your home or a bedroom as a studio? Or do you have an offsite so you can really focus, or do you plan to build Disney studios in the future? So
mhm.
knowing that will help with tax implications, but definitely work with your CPA or accountant on these. This is generally not something you want to do on TurboTax annually, just
Yeah.
because, unless you take a tax class and you feel very, competent in this, because you can get audited and actually your LLC can get revoked if they feel that you're not being truthful. And,
Oh, wow.
it's not that you were fraudulent or you're trying to deceive anyone. It's just lack of knowledge of, I mean, like legal, taxation is its own language that I don't pretend to know. I just don't. And so it's very complicated. And you also want to make sure that they're not you're not paying as more taxes than you need to, right? And you're gaining all of those write-offs that you should have for the
Yeah.
business that you're running. This is for your benefit. So,
Ex-
yeah.
Exactly. Now, as you were talking about with C Corp, with having the you know you're on the stock market as such as that, but uh, how does the choice of business structures affect a person's ability to raise funds or attract investors?
So from a nonprofit standpoint, this business entity, it's fantastic because you're able to receive funds tax-free, and there are plenty of corporations out there and individuals that wish to donate tax-free. So it's a write-off for them. So
Yeah.
fantastic. Nonprofit, though, is very hard to manage. There's a lot of players. It's highly
Mhm.
regulated. A lot of documents need to be filed. And receiving such thing as government money grants instead of just donations is very time consuming. You actually have to report on that, how it was used, where it was used, and give examples. So you have to, your documentation has to be in order. So it's an exchange of time, a person on staff that's in, knows how to do this, maybe two people, and they're reporting back to the government of how the money was used. But an LLC operating agreement and bylaws, this is how the LLC will be governed. And the sole proprietorship, you can receive and assign percentages of ownership and royalties based on each project. So it doesn't have to be like the totality of the LLC as a whole. It
Yeah.
could be for each project. So it's very beneficial to have an LLC. And also it's I would say it's professional. If you have an LLC in good standing with the state and with the federal government, and investors are more likely to probably invest, um, of course, seeing your portfolio and what you've done, than having to sue an individual if you don't really do what you say you're going to do with their investment. And then they own part of that project. So
Mhm.
it's kind of interesting. It's very attractive, I would
Yeah.
say, to investors and individuals, that even friends and family that we know that want to invest because they believe in us. They trust because it's also in the LLC, and the operating agreement and bylaws state so. Something really tangible that they can say they breached their operating agreement. We're suing them based on article blah blah blah, and also our investment agreement. So I think it's enticing for others to want to invest into LLCs, and they still do for sole proprietors. I'm not saying that that's a second choice, but it appears more professional and tangible for investors, especially if you're dealing with other corporations. Sometimes nonprofits even want to collaborate and donate to some of the funds that they've received because of the work that one is doing. So I think the pros for a sole practitioner, proprietor, would be easy and inexpensive to set up. You don't have to do anything. You just use your social security number. But then, of course, then your liability is everything that you own personally. Okay. Um, a complete control over the business. Absolutely. That's good and bad for some of us that are organized and not organized, right? Okay. Simplified tax filing. Obviously, it goes under your own social security number, and there's one tax return with a different schedule. And that's where you lay it all out. The cons are unlimited personal liability, harder to raise capital, most likely, and a business ends with the owner's death unless there's a succession plan in place and someone is buying it or they're just handing it over. For a limited liability company, there's limited personal liability, which is really great. If someone sues the business, it hits the news, it's under the business name, not you personally. This is really helpful when you live in a smaller community and where reputation is very important. You really cannot suffer any reputational harm. Doesn't matter if this company folds, any company that you start in the future, and you're won't be trusted, and that's really important. Flexibility in management and profit distribution for an LLC. So this is really great, especially if you have 1 to 3, we have one managing member and other members that are part of it. They're like your board. They could be possibly operating as executives. And, it's distributed there. So is the profit and the management of the entire organization day to day. Pass-through taxation is another benefit. It avoids double taxation because it's not a C corporation. And some of the cons that would be for an LLC would be, obviously it's more complex to set up, but it's really not, I'll tell you that. And to maintain, we'll go over the maintenance part of an LLC in a little bit. Yeah, it's easier to be a sole proprietor. It's easy to file one tax return. It's easy not to have to file any documents other than maybe a home work permit or a home business license, or maybe even have a lease. But for a couple sheets of paper and a little bit more of management, and you have that shield of legal liability. So, and state-specific regulations that complicate management. In an LLC, it's not really that complicated. You get the hang of it. Like I said, it's like 3 forms. You form it, and there's 3 forms annually, and you just have to file an additional tax return. But if you plan for that expense and you have a good, accountant or tax preparer, that pays for itself right there, because they'll give you the
Yes.
expenses that will cover those expenses. Also, again, it's hard to insure yourself as a business, but if you're an LLC, you can have your business insured, especially if
Mm.
you're dealing with data, because data now is a hot topic. And if
Yes.
your business has to do with data and there's a breach, and your business partners or your third parties in which you're providing services for, their information gets out and you're reported to the
Yes.
OCR or anyone else, there's going to be some fines there. So the insurance policy might, which one you choose, the coverage may actually cover part or all of that. So
Mm.
those are some other advantages of being an LLC. Nonprofit, we'll jump to that because unless Dana, I'll let you interrupt me if you want to know more about the S and the C Corp. But nonprofits, oh my gosh, like we talked about, endless opportunities to raise funds and use funds in the way in which the nonprofit is organized to help the world, whatever it is that it's niches in. So public and private grants, tax exempt status, state and
Mm.
federal, deductible donations for donors. The cons are nonprofits are horrific at maintaining, and you have to stay on top of it. Okay. And if you're good with this and you love this pragmatic, Stephen Covey checklist stuff, this is the one for you. Okay.
Yes.
This will keep you busy. You'll be taking care of your loved one, the person that you're custodian of. Very complex, time consuming to set up. There are prerequisites in the way that you do it, compliance requirements as a tax exempt business entity, strict operational limitations, and this is in the bylaws as well. And you must report. You must report. In fact, there's 4 types of nonprofits that we see today. Those that are religious, so churches and also spiritual temples, the non-secular type of religions. Public benefit, this is the one we hear of all the time, the 501
Mhm.
series, right, where they're organized for charitable purposes for the public
Yes.
or their niche. Then we have the mutual benefit, which is not a charitable purpose company, but they're still doing things for the community. And then this one's interesting, is the mutual benefit common interest, CID. And these are like very specialized. These are nonprofits that operate as associations or societies or foundations, and also like an example would be a homeowners association. They just
Oh,
exist to kind of manage, store money, have a bank account, and pay for repairs and regular expenses. And so that would be a mutual benefit, common interest type of entity. Um,
some
we
people
were
might
talking,
argue about HOAs on that one, depending on
of
your
course,
HOA.
people love or hate them. They keep the toilets with the flowers out of the front yard, but and the pink houses, but they also govern everything. You know,
Yes.
So very how you park in your driveway, for heaven's sake. So it's the
Yeah.
CC&Rs for HOAs are very particular, and there's
Yeah.
always those that are watching, right?
Yeah.
They
Yes.
call them the Karens and the Kens, I guess.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
I think it's
that's
my
good
notes.
information, especially with a lot of people try. that have that passion for nonprofit, being a nonprofit, knowing what it entails, because a lot of times we only see one side of these aspects, and we're not seeing everything in full of all the behind the scenes that you have to do to make all sure the boxes are checked, the T's are crossed, and the I's are dotted.
Well, you really have
Now,
to, because they don't want anyone not paying taxes. So you know
yes.
why there's so many regulations. But I was just going to say something. Oh, so if anyone is interested, just get online and type in how to form a nonprofit, and you will see that there are all these steps. Researching the name. Is anyone else doing anything like this? What are the trademarks and copyrights that are currently held by those
Mm,
that might be similar to this nonprofit that you'd like to start? File your paperwork in the proper whatever state that you choose. Then you go into get your SS4, the EIN from federal. Then you go back to the state and then you apply for tax exempt status. Then you go back to the IRS and you apply for tax exempt status. And
wow.
if it's not granted, like what do you do? And then you get your operating agreement and the bylaws in place. You have to assemble a board, choose a board,
Mhm.
choose who's going to be the face of the nonprofit, the executive director or CEO. They've started to use CEO a lot more these days than just executive
Yes.
director, and setting up those that are in charge of each functional vertical, if you will, of the nonprofit. It can't just be one person. So
Mm,
I see some people trying to start nonprofits just so that they can get the tax benefit, but there are these things put in place, and the board must meet. The board is actually making the decisions, not the executives. So it's the
mhm.
usual, like with regular corporations. Um, but what I say, you hypothetically founded this nonprofit, you're the executive director, you're not on the board, or maybe you are and you're voted out. There's
Mm,
nothing you can do.
yeah.
So, yeah, very interesting ways to think about it in an operational sense. So, no, it's not just a breeze to start a nonprofit. And if
Yeah.
someone tells you that they've never done it, or they're incorrect, or they just loved punishment.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking.
I always say to each their own. So for those that are watching, you've heard what the advantages and disadvantages of being a sole proprietor, whether forming a partnership, setting up an LLC or a nonprofit, to give those ideas. But and then also uh, a brief idea of S corp. I know a lot of you, for those that are, like you said, looking at being the next Disney or something, and is it easier to go with I'll start as an LLC and then change to an S corp, or do you change it over to the C corp, or is it something that whatever you file as you stay as?
Well, I think if you're going to do it yourself, do not do this. You're going to have to hire help. It takes a
Mm,
while to do the conversion, and the IRS is heavily involved in that when you change your status, because it changes their taxation structure,
mm,
and it can take up to a year. I hear, well, pre-COVID, it was about 6 months, but if you can get a registered tax preparer or someone that's CPA that works with the IRS on a regular basis, it would be expedited very quickly, versus, or much quicker than you doing it yourself. It is very difficult. I'll be honest
mm,
with you. I am not, you can't just, oh, I'll switch it later. It will be a big headache. That's why I think thoughtful, examination of what you really want to do is important. However, if you start something, you intend it to be really small, and all of a sudden the world loves it, and now you're becoming larger and
yeah,
larger, then that happens.
yeah.
And you will have to go through that, but you'll have enough funds to hire someone to help you. But it's always possible. This is just my personal opinion of what I've seen. It's always possible to change your status. It's just difficult. It takes a while, and there's a lot that goes into it. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Now, when you were talking about nonprofit and the pros and cons with that, if someone is, of course, there's the different types of 501s, as you mentioned. How would, like, if someone has a comic book, business or something, and they want it for a social or educational mission. How is that? Which type of 501 would be recommended for a nonprofit organization for doing that? Because, like you said, there's several classifications under the
Yeah,
501, but which one will be the one that they need to consider when they're doing that paperwork?
I think a C, and I'll let me pull this up I'll pull this up so I can answer your question. There's different types. Let's
Yeah, because
see
I know the
here.
most popular is the 501c3, and then you have the 501c7 and
Yeah,
things like
there's
that.
there's
So
yeah, the whole series of C's. I think three is the best because it is for the general public and it is charitable, it's educational, it's literary, and in some instances scientific too, the comics. So, you're bringing science into it. So it just depends. And, some people also will put religion into it too. So you kind of hit all of those. I know that's meant to read like scientific organizations and also religious organizations like churches and things of that nature. But I think it's would fall mostly on educational and literary. And that's why I think the 501c3 is the best for a comic creator.
got you. Okay. So of course, how do you how do the different business structures impact intellectual property ownership and protection for comic book creators out there?
Oh, well, all of them impact. It's not something that how do I phrase this? It's not your business structure doesn't dictate how you protect your IP. It's how you protect your IP. So it is IP, intellectual property is anything that's created by yourself or your company. This includes computer programs, logos, inventions, trade secrets, product designs, business plans, and here you go, literary and artistic work. So this now is where you would place certain trademarks and copyrights under the name of the LLC. They would no longer be held in your name personally. And if you were to do that, then at the time of your death or when you're leaving the LLC and you've sold it or you've named a successor, then it needs to be transferred to the name of the LLC. So if you've passed away, then this would be part of your estate, and hopefully you made provisions for that in your trust or your will. So, uh, okay, I'm going to go over, I want to do what a trademark is and copyright because I get this question a lot. Okay, so a trademark
Yeah.
is to protects business and product names, slogans, and logos. Okay. A copyright protects creative works, including books, movies, songs, paintings, photos, web, content, and choreography. So those are the differences. And so making sure that you're filing with the US Patent Trademark Office for your trademark under the name of the LLC. And of course, you're the contact. Um, and then for the copyrights, you want to go to the US Library of Congress. And that's where you would put it under the name of the LLC. So it depends on how you leave it and how you provide for it in your paperwork and your documentation. So name and also how you document it.
That's good to know, especially like with so many creatives, whether you're a writer or artist or a comic book creator, you spend so much time and energy creating your brand, but also your unique characters, kind of like the
Yes.
Stan Lee creating a Spider-Man or creating um, the
Or
X-Men or
Moana
anything
with
like that.
Nakua, yeah, or
Exactly.
yeah, Nohea.
So that's kind of good, especially like you said with Moana or the creatives out there, to make sure they have that copyright on that. That if someone tries to use it and
Yes.
profit off of it, you are protected. That they do something bad with it and they're coming after you. It's like, nope, that wasn't me.
Well, yeah, and just even, it's fascinating when others, educators, academics put together, and including those that are students, put together a PowerPoint or a course. that they're
Yes.
going to sell, or they're going to, in their thesis, and they want to use the image of Nohea. And, you know, they have to contact you if there is a
Yes.
copyright mark on that to say, may I use this? May I
Hmm.
have a license to use? What would it cost me? And then you come back with, you know what, I want $2,500. You're going to be profiting off of this, or I want a percentage of this course. Who are you selling it to? How many
Yes.
people are going to see this? And then the person that's putting together the course or the thesis can say, you know what, never mind, I can't afford that, or that's ludicrous, or it could be $25. It could be five. It's whatever the creator decides it's worth to be able to use for that
Yeah.
purpose that they're being contacted. I know that my editor and screenwriting teacher, he was putting together an anthology books, and he wanted to use certain portions of different movies to contrast, and a lot of them said no, you can't use it in your
Mm.
book, and some said
Yeah.
yes. So that's also another thing, is it takes time to protect your assets,
Yeah.
and this is what you'll have to do. But copywriting is the first way to do it. If you're a creator, your logo, then, of course, that'd be a trademark, and it's good for 10 years, whereas a copyright is good for 70. So you absolutely
Mm.
have to make provisions for that, because I won't be here in 70 years. If I
Yeah.
trademark, or excuse me, copyright something today, I have to leave it in my kids' names, or in an LLC that I'm going to be putting all of my assets in, so that it
Yeah.
goes to the right people. And so things we need to think about. And also, a trademark is only good for 10 years. If you miss that renewal, which you'll get a renewal notice from the USPTO, but you miss that renewal and it's free game. So making sure that
Wow.
you calendar when the renewal is going to happen, and make sure you pay those. And now, luckily, a lot of the federal services are online electronically, so you can pay it online. And if you let it lapse and you try to renew, there's a lot of fiery hoops that you'll have to jump through. And if someone files first,
Mm.
it's a little bit of a fight.
Wow. Well, it kind of gives that, the most recent thing of people seeing like the black and white version of Mickey Mouse from
Mm.
Steamboat, the
Yeah.
Steamboat movie. Because it's outside that 70 years, it was now available for public use. And it was a lot of distinguishing for people to understand that it's not Mickey Mouse as a whole, but just that particular version of Mickey Mouse that was copyrighted. That now that version is, but the current version that we all know is not. And if you use that in any kind of form, Disney will come after you.
And
So
they do.
yes,
Oh,
they
do
will.
they? Uh-huh. Woo!
So that is a good thing for people to kind of understand, especially for any characters or any creations you create, that you have that protection for your brand and for it to be under your LLC. So it will forever stay protected for those 70
Yes.
years, even if you pass on.
Well, and I also wanted to add to that, Dana, is that, protecting your IP and your assets is an internal job. I mean, research for like marks constantly to see and names, if anyone's infringing slightly on your marks and your name. And make sure you're not confusing the public by putting out new marks that are too similar to someone else's marks.
Mm,
And making sure that you protect yourself with your employees, your contractors, and the third parties that you're working with. Have them sign an NDA
yes.
stating that they have no claim, no ownership, percentage otherwise, they have no license to use that. What they're being exposed to is solely for the purpose in which they are providing services to you. And this is really, really important. Some say that an NDA won't hold up in court, but if it's drafted properly, absolutely it would.
Mm,
And it needs to be in writing. Can't be verbal, right? We talked about
yes.
verbal contracts. So having a really great NDA, that's one-sided. It's not bilateral, it's unilateral, and it covers the artist and the owner of the marks. And that's really, really important. And how long is that good for? Does it expire? In what context can they share it? Do they need written approval from you
Mhm.
before they share it? Or they just share it so it's really quite important to have that NDA in place. Yeah. and make sure that you're not giving them access to items that they should not have access to, period, end
Yeah.
of discussion. And,
Mhm.
unfortunately, we have that gift now of screenshotting too.
Yeah.
So anything can happen. It could be in a PowerPoint when you're trying to explain your services and how you need them, and boom, there you go. They've been taking
Mm.
screenshots the entire time, and
Yes.
therefore they have your images. So,
That is very true. And it's very good that you were mentioning about doing that research, because I know there was a lot of hoopla a few years ago when there was a company that was trying to copyright Aloha to for their company, and Hawaiians lost it. Like you cannot copyright a word that is part of the language and things. So that was very interesting to kind of see how someone is trying to trademark a common word. I guess kind of doing a similarity of like Apple with they trademarked Apple, and the logo that they created
yeah.
for that. But it was not like you couldn't use the word Apple, but it's just you cannot use Apple as far as your company name, product, or things like that outside of the ones that grow on the tree.
Mhm. This is true. And it was also in Chicago, Aloha Poke, and that was another one. And then I also came aware of a gentleman trying to trademark two cultural terms, titles in our culture, and I brought that to the public. So it's you
Mhm.
can't prohibit someone from using certain cultural terms and titles, and then why? Because if you trademark that or you make it a service mark, then you have the ability legally to have everyone pay to be able to use these
Use
titles
those, yeah,
annually. So it's a moneymaker,
yeah.
and it's just inappropriate entirely, and
Mm,
it's illegal. So of course I
yes.
contested that personally.
But
Woo!
but that is definitely a good thing for those that are looking at creating a business or currently in the start of one, to make sure they keep those kind of things in mind when they're creating a name or a brand or a character name, to make sure it's not something that is, if it is tied to a culture, that it is not something that is profited off of because of the use of that name, because you entitle in actuality should be paying the culture because you borrowed it from them.
No, but they don't. There's a new company that's doing very well out here, and it is our greeting in Hawaiian, and it's all of this merchandise. And so I actually commented and said, how does this company benefit Kanaka Maoli with its proceeds? It's got an amazing storefront, and I can't imagine what that rent is in the most expensive part of Southern California. And so I don't know how they trademarked. I should look it up. I don't know how they trademarked their name, because they are using our greeting. So very interesting. But look at BlackBerry, right? I mean, my favorite phone in the world, gone now, right?
Well,
But
it's not gone. It's just
well,
not.
yeah, yes, it's
Yeah,
not a phone. Well,
it's
they're more into
restricted
the
now
security,
on where you can buy
security
it.
software. But you know what I mean? It's like, you can't do that because it's a fruit, but it depends on how you can have two different. So there is an energy drink called Kumu, and that was
Yes.
trademarked, but it's for an energy drink. They're not trying to just take the name. So
Yeah.
it's very, they have the laws are very interesting. What really now is going to get me an IP is these digital images, right? And
Mhm.
so NFPs and things of that nature. If someone takes a picture of me when I'm out and then they try to put it on the digital library up on the net for purchase, who owns that? It's my likeness, but they took the photo, and photographers always own what they take. So unless you have an agreement otherwise. So I'm really fascinated to see how that develops in the future, because it's going
Yeah.
to cause some problems.
Well,
Yeah.
we
Sidetrack,
definitely,
sidebar.
that's all right. It's a great sidebar because we're going to actually be talking about that later on as a future episode about likeness and things like that. So,
Yes.
for those that are curious about that, definitely make sure you keep uh, to like, follow, and subscribe to us
Yeah.
on YouTube, Facebook, and also you don't miss out on that episode to kind of understand that, because that is a hot topic, especially with AI and things going on, that all encompass under that little umbrella. But we'll definitely dive into that on that particular episode. But
And Dana, there's also like digital data agencies popping up right
yes.
now for
Mhm.
celebrities. So these are agencies that actually they hold all the images of certain celebrities
Yes.
and influential people, and they're the ones that manage it now. So it's really
Mm.
fascinating. We've gone from tangible, like I said, take a basketball that was signed by a Laker player, and so he owns the basketball, right, with his signature on it, or someone else bought that. Then someone else takes a picture of that basketball with like who,
Mhm.
so we're getting there.
Yes.
Like, no
Yes.
man-made.
So many layers. So many
Yes, yes.
layers.
Yep,
We'll
yep.
definitely
Anyway.
have to discuss that. But as far as another question that we also have is, um, how does each business structure, especially LLC or a nonprofit or any of those, affect my ability to hire employees or work with freelancers?
Well, they're all the same. It's kind of like IP. It's just how you provide for them and following, obviously, state and federal laws, non-discrimination, non-harassment, things like that. But
Mm.
I think employees is one thing. An LLC can have an employee, and all the rest can have employees. Sole proprietor, not so much. I mean, you can, but that would be a little bit sticky. At that point, you should become an LLC. Um, but freelancers, no, I mean, it's fair game. And it's just making sure that you have a consultant agreement or independent contractor, synonymous, agreements in place, setting out what their work is, where they do it. And also, there's a lot of wage and hour issues and also misclassification, especially here in California, where someone is deemed a contractor or a consultant, a 1099 employee, if you will. But
Mm.
then later you find out that you're making them come into a place, work these hours, and then they're actually by definition through performance an employee. So then there's all of these interesting claims that happen. So it just depends on how you contract with employees, so an employment contract, and also freelancers.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. As we're getting close to the top of the hour, our last question is, what are the key legal documents that I need to prepare when setting up each type of business structure, like an LLC or a nonprofit, for those in the audience to be aware of?
You're sole proprietor, obviously not a business entity, but you're operating as yourself. There's really nothing that you need to comply with except for filing your taxes. But, also important to file for a home work permit or a home business license if that's required in your city and also county. So you need to check those two levels. An LLC, you have articles of organization, you have the SS4 form with the IRS. You have a statement of information that you'll need to provide shortly after forming your LLC. This lays out who's running the LLC. Is it a single managing member? Is it a managing member with several other members? Everyone is listed there. And obviously, principal place of address. And again, if you're filing in a state that is not where you're operating, you'll have to name your registered agent for process there as well. So that's an extra step that you'll have to do. Annual tax return in California,
Mhm.
minimum of $800, even if you have made zero, okay,
Wow.
operating or not. Annual company meeting, that's always fun when it's just one managing member. You just make an annual meeting, minutes of the annual meeting, you place it in your binder, and
Yeah.
that's the discussion of, they
That
want
has
to
to be
know that.
interesting on those minutes. It's like, okay, we discussed, and then all in favor, aye, aye.
Yeah, yes, yes. And passed. Yeah, resolved.
Exactly.
And resolution. Thank you. Concluded at such and such hour. And then employment tax forms, if you have employees. So staying up on those taxes, very, very important.
Mhm.
In
Yes.
S Corp, you will have the articles of incorporation, a little different. Organization, incorporation. This is a corporation now, not a company. So limited liability
Mhm.
company and S corporation and C corporation. So just different names. And some people just go for the corporation because they love the name corporation in their name, right? They love that
Yeah.
word in their name. So articles of incorporation, SS4 form with the IRS, a form 2553, which elects with the IRS that this is a small business, annual a statement of information, annual tax returns, annual corporate meeting, and employment tax form. So pretty much the same, except for that one form with the IRS to designate as a small business. Right?
Gotcha.
A nonprofit is articles of incorporation, because it's a corporation. Get this now, Dana. Operating agreement and bylaws. File
Mhm.
initial report, so statement of information. SS4 with the IRS, annual meeting of the board of directors, file for a state tax exemption number, identification number, file for the federal tax identification number, tax exempt identification number, report ownership to FinCEN, which is Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, register the register for a charitable solicitation with the state in which you're operating in. So you're on the list of nonprofits, and if the
Mhm.
investor comes, they can say, okay, or a donator comes, they can say, okay, they're bona fide, they're actually tax
Mhm.
exempt, and then all of the other business licenses and permits that you need to operate. So there's a
Gotcha.
lot more involved with a nonprofit than any
Mhm.
others. Yeah.
That's good to know on that. Now, as you mentioned, kind of to wrap it up, of course, you recommended, especially if you're deciding on being an LLC or a C Corp or any of those, talking with a financial advisor, someone that understands for those that where can I find someone who I know can do the work? Because there's a lot of people that I do taxes, I do this, but are you just looking for someone that is a who's got their certifications and licenses as an accountant, or are you looking for a different type of someone in the financial world that you should be having those conversations with?
Oh my gosh, if you can find an attorney that actually has a CPA, that's amazing. And these gentlemen, I
Mm,
know one that also acts as an expert witness on the stand when there's, forensic accounting that needs to be done. But that's a little overdone for what you need. I think if you can find an accountant that works closely with a business attorney, then I would suggest, going to meet with them and see if they can help you now that you know what's all in store for you. Try to do some of it on your own so that it lessens the bill.
yes.
Or you can actually look for a business attorney, and then they may have an accountant that they work with regularly that they can refer you to. And that's the route I would go. Otherwise, do tremendous research. Maybe have an attorney just look over what you were able to do and say, am I on the right track here? Is this the process? And there are networking groups that can really provide a lot of support too online. So you might want to think about asking them too. There's a lot of creatives out there that wish they would have known certain things
Mhm.
when they got started, and they are very helpful. So the support groups for creatives that can help in this area too.
That's
Yeah.
great to know. And of course, we thank everybody for tuning in live and those that are watching this on the replay. Of course, we're looking forward, definitely, like I said, subscribe, and hit that notification button so you do not miss our next conversation, which we'll have in June, on June 19th. That's when we're going to dive into intellectual properties. We kind of tiptoed into it today, but we're going to really dive into it because that is a huge question, especially for creatives, those that are designing their own characters and brands and mascots and things like that. or if you're a photographer or a videographer, that is a conversation you want to definitely tune in for at 8:30 p.m. Eastern on June 19th. We're going to dive into that discussion so you can understand how the laws protect you and what things you need to be aware of as you navigate, especially with social media and apps and things like that, of what restrictions and also things that you need to be aware of to help protect yourself better, beyond just putting your watermark on that. Because I know from one creative, he'll have watermarks on stuff and he'll have fans message him saying, hey, we just saw somebody making your artwork on a shirt and selling it on eBay. Not eBay, on Amazon, and it has your watermark on it. But it's definitely one of those conversations for helping our creatives and the people out there as you're navigating, not only you personally, but as a business or a creative, or just as an individual of intellectual property. So definitely tune in on that day. Once again, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in this evening. We look forward to having you tune in tomorrow. Tomorrow we will have our panel that Kumu Michelle Manu was also part of, which we dive into honoring the women in Hawaiian culture. It's going to be tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. That we have Kumu Michelle Manu along with Moana moderating that particular panel, and they're going to dive into that discussion of that for tomorrow evening. So everyone, once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and for those that are watching this on the recording, definitely if you have additional questions or anything, definitely send it to us at moananuipodcast as one word at gmail.com. And of course, as we get ready for the episode next month on intellectual properties, definitely email us questions. Kumu Michelle loves to get those questions in advance so she can really look into, especially give us the question and what state you're in, because then she can look at what laws are in your state that will protect you, or lack of laws in your state to protect you for that. So definitely shoot us an email, especially if you have a business or you're creating something, or if you put pictures out there, definitely send us email, send us your questions, and we'll make sure we ask your question, whether you can tune in live or not. That way you can watch it on the replay and get your answer from her when we come live on June 19th. So everyone, once again, thank you so much for tuning in. You all have a great evening and a great weekend also. All right, everyone. Bye now.
So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. If this the land of the free, it was a freedom then, when they annexed Hawaii and called it Cedar Lands, without any type of payment and no signing off. Called themselves the Republic in 1894. 1.2 million acres overtaken from the native Hawaiians. When they resisted, the West retaliated in violence and erasure. The Hawaiian language is banned as part of colonialism's plan to expand, yeah. Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kaho'olawe as a part of their ongoing war with Asia. Used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. No regard for all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. We will. So if we put Hawaii into perspective, well, Black and Asian history is interconnected. Considering the fight with the Pacific, then of course. Versus Asia, they was treated as a middleman for war, but didn't let the Western colorism run its course. Cause dark skin was a sign of dignity to core. The land was taken in the name of capitalism, when prior to it was an actual kingdom. Clap back at the system. Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kohola Bay as a part of their ongoing war with Asia. Used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. Never work out for all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. We will.